I'd like to continue my series on Joel, and this time we will take up the subject of the second of the four indictments that the Lord will bring all of the nations of the world into judgment for. And this one is, they have parted my land. And this is Joel, part 10. I will also gather all nations, will bring them down into the valley of Jehoshaphat, and will plead with them there for my people and for my heritage Israel, whom they have scattered among the nations and parted my land. And they have cast lots for my people, and have given a boy for a harlot, and sold a girl for wine, that they might drink. Joel chapter 3, verse 2 to 3. Joel the prophet predicted that in the last days God would bring all nations into judgment, listing the complete four-count indictment against the nations. In our previous article, we discussed the first of the four, the charge that the nations have scattered his people among the nations. Only as late as the 1940s, with the return of the Jews to the Holy Land and the rise of the first Universal Conference of all nations, the UN, have the conditions been right for the fulfillment of this ancient prophecy. The second indictment against the nations of the world is that they have participated in the partition of God's land. Now, this will bring judgment to the nations of the world. Now, one of the very first UN resolutions was called UN Resolution 181, which was concerned with the partition of the land of, quote, Palestine, unquote, for the separate, calling for the separate borders in the Holy Land, which delineated an Arab state called Palestine and the Jewish state of Israel. It also separated Jerusalem, calling for it to have the status of an international city. This is why I literally believe Joel is describing the UN here in this vision from around 800 years before Christ. Israel isn't the property of the UN, the Vatican, the European Union, nor the Arabs, not to mention, nor is it the property of Israel. For Israel belongs to God himself. And I quote from the covenant, Leviticus 25:23. Thus saith the Lord, the land shall not be sold permanently, for the land is mine. You, Israel, are strangers and sojourners with me. Therefore, for the nations of the world to deliberate at the UN or in Rome or Washington or Cairo as to the disposal of the Holy Land and its borders, as if it were theirs to dispose of, is arrogant presumption. Not even the Jews have the right to trade the land for peace. Although the leadership of Israel, being for the most part secular in their outlook, would desperately love to do so, they would love to trade land for peace if it would bring peace. The British were given the mandate over the Holy Land after defeating the Ottoman Turks in Jerusalem in the First World War. The Turks had taken the losing side in the war, thus to the winners went the Middle Eastern spoils. It was the first time in 1,000 years that the Holy Land was in the custody of Christians, basically. Interestingly, the Turks fled Jerusalem after learning of the name of the British general who besieged it, which was Allenby. The reason they fled was because they heard the name Allenby as Allah Nabi, which means Allah's prophet in Arabic. Now, God does indeed have a sense of humor. The British had promised a Jewish chemist, Chaim Weizmann, a homeland for the Jews in the traditional borders after the war in exchange for the invention of a synthetic gunpowder. These traditional borders included much on the eastern side of the Jordan River in the area now known as the Kingdom of Jordan. The problem arose because the British had also promised the same area east of the Jordan River, they called it the Transjordan, to the royal Hashemite family of Arabs who had been displaced out of Arabia by the clan of Ibn Saud with the help of the British. The British parted the land to appease the Arabs, and they gave 75% of what they had promised Israel to the Hashemite family, who, by the way, are direct descendants of Muhammad. Now, the sun has been setting on the British Empire ever since. Think about it. The British Empire survived 2 world wars, but could not survive parting the land of Israel and double-crossing the Jews. God does have a foreign policy. I will bless those that bless you and curse those that curse you. Genesis 12:3. Now, currently, this prophecy is also being fulfilled by the insistence of the UN that Israel return to its pre-1967 borders, which would render it totally indefensible, as well as the pressure exerted to cede the Gaza and the so-called West Bank territory, which biblically is called Judea and Samaria. The United States, under the Obama administration, has been insisting upon a, quote, no natural growth policy for Judea, which means that the number of Jewish settlers was to be capped, allowing for no further growth in population. This would effectively strangle the existing population, forcing the remaining Jews to leave. Now, while Arab leaders, international statesmen, human rights champions of every stripe, the Pope, the presidents of the free world, the UN delegates, and a host of other parliamentarians the world over heatedly debate over the, quote, status of Jerusalem and the, quote, legitimate borders of Israel, the holy God of the Bible is watching and taking names. It would be well to remember the words of the prophet Ezekiel in his prophecy to the West Bank, that is, the mountains of Judea. This is Ezekiel 35. Also, thou son of man, prophesy to the mountains of Israel and say, you mountains of Israel, hear the word of the Lord. Thus saith the Lord God, because the enemy has said against you, aha, even the ancient high places are ours in possession. Therefore prophesy and say, thus saith the Lord God, because they have made you desolate and swallowed you up on every side, that you might be a possession to the rest of the heathen, and you are taken up in the lips of talkers, and are an infamy of the people. Therefore, you mountains of Israel, hear the word of the Lord God. Thus saith the Lord God to the mountains and to the hills and to the rivers and to the valleys and to the desolate wastes and to the cities that are forsaken, which became a prey and derision to the rest of the heathen that are round about. Therefore, thus saith the Lord God, surely in the fire of my jealousy have I spoken against the rest of the heathen and against all of Edom, which have appointed my land for their possession, with the joy of all their heart, with despiteful minds, to cast it out for a prey. Prophesy, therefore, concerning the land of Israel, and say unto the mountains, and to the hills, and to the rivers, and to the valleys, thus saith the Lord God, behold, I have spoken in my jealousy and in my fury, because you have borne the shame of the heathen. Therefore thus saith the Lord God, I have lifted up my hand. Surely the heathen that are about you, they shall bear their shame. But you, O mountains of Israel, you will shoot forth your branches and yield your fruit to my people of Israel, for they are at hand to come. For behold, I am for you, and I will turn unto you, and you will be tilled and sown, and I will multiply men upon you, all the house of Israel, even all of it, and the cities shall be inhabited, and the wastes shall be builded. Well, the kings of the earth, the heathen, the rulers, the do-gooders, the civil rights, the international community, they have all abrogated the land of Israel to themselves, and they would presume to decree its boundaries. But God, 2,800 years ago, through the prophet Joel, said that one of the indictments he's going to bring against the nations of the world is that they have dared to part his land. More to come. Shalom.